Ancient Rome did not treat gladiators like movie heroes. It turned them into branded celebrities, half-starved athletes, medical experiments, political props, and premium bloodshed for the crowd. In this video, you are getting 32 bizarre gladiator facts that make the movies look tame, polished, and almost embarrassingly polite. 1. The retiarus was basically the arena's chaos goblin, a guy with a trident, a net, and almost no armor, plus no helmet to hide behind. Against heavily armored opponents, that was a terrifying amount of exposed skin. Romans had very mixed feelings about him. A lot of them mocked this fighter type as soft, because apparently using speed and technique instead of clanking around in metal was suspiciously unmanly. And yet the same people packed the seats to watch him. Of course they did. The retiarus was different, flashy, unpredictable, and way more dramatic than another shield-on-shield slugfest. Rome sneered at him and adored him at the same time. Which is not surprising. People have always loved the thing they claim is beneath them. Disgust and obsession have been roommates since the beginning of civilization. 2. Not every gladiator got dragged into the arena in chains. Some were auctorati, free Roman citizens who voluntarily signed themselves into gladiator service for a set number of years. Why would a sane person do that? Usually because life had already punched them in the face. Crushing debts, family problems, no inheritance, no respectable path forward. For a desperate man, the arena could look less like a nightmare and more like a weird career move. The contract brought immediate money, often enough to wipe out debts on the spot. After that, all you had to do was not die in public. Easy, right? Others wanted the fame. Gladiators had terrible legal status, but socially they could become absolute stars. Crowds screamed for them, women chased them, and some men decided applause was worth the risk of being stabbed for a living. 3. You know that line every gladiator movie loves to scream at the emperor? Those who are about to die salute you? Great cinema. Terrible history. It appears only once in the ancient sources, and not from regular gladiators at all, but from condemned men in a staged naval spectacle under Emperor Claudius. That was a very specific event, not the official arena catchphrase of Rome. Professional gladiators were not dramatic death poets announcing their doom before every match. They were skilled fighters trying very hard to stay alive, get paid, and come back next month with all their organs still in the right places. Their pre-fight routine was probably much less theatrical and much more practical. Checking gear, calming nerves, maybe a quick prayer, maybe a final curse at their trainer. Hollywood wanted doom-soaked grandeur. Real life usually wants working equipment and decent footwork. 4. Emperor Commodus loved stepping into the arena because he thought he was basically Hercules with a crown. Brave? Not exactly. His opponents were often prisoners, injured men, or people who had no realistic chance against him. Commodus got sharp steel. They got wooden weapons or some other humiliating handicap. Sometimes the animals he heroically fought were already weakened, restrained, or drugged, which is a very convenient way to become a legend if your only real talent is cheating with confidence. Then, after each glorious fake victory, he charged the Roman treasury a ridiculous fee. Yes, he made the empire pay him for his own staged nonsense. At one point, he killed an ostrich, carried its severed head toward the senators, and silently suggested they could be next. Nobody laughed. They just sat there, frightened, while the emperor did murderous improv. Eventually, he was strangled in his bath. Shockingly, people had reached their limit. 5. Gladiators got some of the best medical care in the Roman world, which sounds almost wholesome until you remember the reason. They were expensive investments. A dead fighter is emotionally moving for about 5 seconds and financially useless forever. So major gladiator schools hired skilled physicians, sometimes men whose talents normally served elites. These doctors patched up broken limbs, stitched deep cuts, treated infections, and got an incredible amount of practice because the workplace was basically organized injury. One of antiquity's most famous physicians, Galen, sharpened his medical knowledge treating gladiators in Pergamon. That meant real anatomy lessons, real trauma work, and endless opportunities to learn what happens when a human body gets opened by metal. Fighters also received baths, massages, and carefully managed diets. None of this came from compassion. It came from profit. Rome offered premium healthcare when keeping you alive was good business. 6. Romans took omens very seriously, and lightning was not just weather to them. It was Jupiter sending a message with all the subtlety of a divine hammer. So if lightning struck an arena before or during the games, that was treated as heavenly disapproval, and the spectacle could stop immediately. Priests would be called in, purification rituals performed, and everyone would wait to see whether the king of the gods had finished expressing his opinion. In some cases, games were delayed for days. If a strike hit the venue itself, more ceremonies might be required before anyone resumed stabbing each other for entertainment. The Colosseum was especially vulnerable because its tall fittings for the huge awning system practically invited strikes, though Romans had no clue about electricity. To them, every bolt looked personal. When Jupiter started throwing sparks, even emperors remembered there was someone higher up the chain. 7. Caracalla had what people politely call a temper problem, which is a charming way of describing a deeply paranoid emperor with the emotional stability of a lit torch in a fireworks shop. During games in Alexandria, he believed people in one section of the crowd were laughing at him. Maybe they were. Maybe they were laughing at something else. Maybe he imagined the whole thing. It did not matter, because Caracalla responded like a man who thought public embarrassment justified mass murder. He ordered soldiers into the stands and told them to kill everyone in that section. Not clear it out. Not arrest a few hecklers. Kill them. Thousands died during what was supposed to be ordinary entertainment because one emperor could not handle the idea that somebody might be mocking him. Later, he punished the city even more. And now, tourists remember his baths in Rome better than his atrocities. History can be embarrassingly forgiving when the architecture is nice. 8. Caligula enjoyed humiliating senators the way some people enjoy party games, except his version involved terror and absolute power. Before or during public spectacles, he sometimes forced elderly or overweight senators to run around the arena while the crowd watched. Imagine the supposed leaders of Rome, sweating through their togas and gasping for breath like unwilling contestants in the empire's cruelest fitness challenge. Meanwhile, Caligula sat comfortably above them, amused by the fact that men who held rank, wealth, and prestige were still powerless when he decided to turn them into live comedy. And of course, they played along, because refusing Caligula was not a healthy hobby. Embarrassment was still preferable to execution, which under him was always hovering nearby like a badly adjusted ceiling fan. He ruled only 4 years before being stabbed by the Praetorian Guard. Honestly, for a boss like that, 4 years feels incredibly generous. 9. Romans adored novelty, and the arena was not just blood sport. It was also a very dark variety show. That meant special attractions designed to shock, amuse, or simply give the audience something new to gawk at. Among those spectacles were bouts involving dwarfs, sometimes fighting each other, sometimes matched against women. To modernize, this looks cruel, exploitative, and wildly uncomfortable because it was. But Roman audiences treated it as premium entertainment, complete with cheering, betting, and all the normal arena excitement. Emperor Domitian was especially fond of these shows and staged some under torchlight, because apparently the whole thing was not theatrical enough already. The participants were using real weapons, facing real danger, and risking real death. The crowd still laughed. Rome could turn almost any human difference into public amusement. Bread in circuses was not just policy. It was a national personality disorder. 10. Animal trainers in Roman spectacles worked under the kind of pressure that makes modern office stress look like a scented candle. If your lion refused to attack, if your leopard looked bored, if your carefully prepared beast decided today was actually a good day for a nap, you could end up punished or even killed yourself. Emperors wanted violence on schedule, and a lazy animal ruined the whole production. So handlers used brutal methods to force aggression, starvation, pain, stimulants, fear, anything that increased the chance of a spectacular mauling. If it still failed, the trainer became the perfect scapegoat. Why did the animal not perform? Clearly your fault. Enjoy the arena. The result was a system where cruelty became job insurance, and failure could get you fed into the same machine you served. Animals suffered so humans would suffer so audiences could clap. Rome built an entire economy around weaponized misery. 11. Romans believed the dead were not always done with the living, especially if the living kept up the relationship properly. That is why some gladiator graves included special tubes running from the surface into the burial chamber below. Visitors could pour wine, oil, or other offerings down these pipes to nourish the spirit of the dead fighter. Yes, this was basically ancient graveside drink delivery. The custom was not exclusive to gladiators, but it shows up often enough in their burials because they inspired intense devotion from fans. People who had only watched these men in the arena felt personally connected enough to keep sending them gifts after death. It is weird, touching, and slightly unhinged all at once. Archaeologists still find these libation pipes in gladiator cemeteries. So even in death, the fan relationship did not end. Rome invented the afterlife version of celebrity obsession and committed to it with plumbing. 12. The Andabati may have been the most absurd gladiator-type Rome ever came up with, which is saying something in a culture that regularly monetized human suffering with creative flair. These fighters wore helmets with no eye openings at all. None. Zero vision. Just total darkness and a sword. Then they were sent out to bumble around the arena trying to hit each other while the crowd enjoyed the chaos. Picture two armed men stumbling, swinging, colliding, and occasionally landing a blow by accident. To the Romans, this was quality entertainment. Historians still argue over exactly who these men were. Some suspect they were condemned criminals forced into a grotesque joke. Others think they may have relied on sound and training more than we assume. Either way, the basic setup remains ridiculous. So, if your job ever feels degrading, remember that somewhere in Roman history, somebody got paid or forced to sword fight blind. 13. Movies love to give gladiators the body of a modern action star, all carved abs and dramatic shoulder definition. Real gladiators were often built very differently and on purpose. Many carried a noticeable layer of body fat, especially around the belly, because that extra padding was useful. A blade slicing into fat looked dramatic, spilled a lot of blood, and still had a better chance of missing the vital organs underneath. In other words, a softer body could help keep a fighter alive longer while still delivering the kind of visible damage the audience paid to see. Trainers understood this perfectly. These men were not sculpting themselves for beach photos. They were developing practical survival armor made of food. So forget the impossibly shredded movie version. A successful gladiator may have looked more like a heavily conditioned heavyweight athlete than a polished fitness poster. Rome valued performance, not magazine cover vanity. 14. Gladiators were often called retiari, or barley men, which sounds less like terrifying killers and more like a strangely aggressive breakfast club. The nickname came from their diet, which leaned heavily on barley, beans, porridge, dried fruit, and other cheap, filling foods. A lot of it was plant-based, not because Rome had suddenly become enlightened about wellness, but because this diet helped build the protective fat layer trainers wanted. Lean muscle looked great, but did not always serve arena economics. Then there is the truly bizarre part. Gladiators may have drunk a mixture involving plant ash or wood ash dissolved in liquid. Bone studies suggest high calcium intake, and researchers think this nasty gray drink functioned like an ancient recovery supplement, helping strengthen bones against repeated impacts. So yes, 2,000 years before modern gym culture, Roman fighters were already doing targeted nutrition. Their version just tasted like somebody stirred a fireplace into a cup. 15. Gladiators formed burial societies called collegia, and these groups were basically ancient mutual aid clubs with a very specific and very Roman mission, making sure members got proper funerals. Everyone paid in, the society kept funds, and when one of them died, the group handled the burial, rites, and memorial arrangements. This mattered enormously because Romans took funerary obligations seriously. To die without proper rites was not just sad. It could mean spiritual disaster and restless dead. For gladiators, many of whom were slaves or otherwise near the bottom of society, these associations created a rare sense of dignity and protection. Men whom the law treated as disposable still organized to defend one another from anonymous oblivion. There is something genuinely moving about that. They could not always save each other in life, but they could at least make sure no one vanished unmarked into the ground. That is solidarity with a funeral budget. 16. Gladiator combat was not a lawless free-for-all. It had rules, pauses, procedures, and referees, because Rome could turn absolutely anything into regulated administration. The main officials, often called summa iudices, carried staffs and were not shy about using them. If a fighter broke the rules, stalled too much, or got annoyingly passive, the referee could physically intervene and whack him back into proper conduct. Yes, even organized blood sport came with active customer service management. Matches had standards for when combat should stop, when it resumed, what counted as surrender, and what kinds of attacks were acceptable. The crowd might scream, complain, or demand more violence, but the officials still controlled the pace. That is the weird beauty of Rome. Even while men hacked at each other in public, somebody in the arena was still acting like a stern bureaucrat, making sure everyone followed procedure while committing entertainment-grade violence. 17. Rome managed to create one of history's strangest legal contradictions with gladiators. Many were legally infamies, stripped of ordinary civic respectability, and, in many cases, enslaved. On paper, these men had very little standing. In practice, successful gladiators could make serious money, receive gifts from patrons, accumulate property, and sometimes build real personal wealth. Some even owned houses, land, and yes, slaves of their own. So you could end up with a man who was legally another person's property while also owning other human beings as property himself. That sounds like a legal system eating its own tail, but Rome handled it with the same cold efficiency it applied to everything else involving slavery. The lanista owned the gladiator. The gladiator could still own assets beneath him. Nothing about that is morally coherent, but moral coherence was never the point. Rome ran on slavery so completely that even the enslaved could become miniature landlords inside the machine. 18. That famous thumbs-down moment in gladiator stories is probably one giant historical misunderstanding. Modern movies love the image of an emperor slowly lowering his thumb to order death, but the ancient evidence is much murkier, and many historians think we have been doing the gesture backwards for ages. The phrase often cited, pollice verso, only means a turned thumb. It does not clearly say down, up, sideways, or anything else useful. Some scholars argue that an extended thumb, perhaps aimed like a weapon, signaled death. Others think mercy was shown by hiding the thumb or closing the fist, symbolically keeping the blade sheathed. In that reading, the dramatic downward thumb from movies may have meant exactly the opposite of what modern audiences assume. So every time Hollywood uses that gesture for a big death sentence moment, somewhere the ghosts of Roman spectators are probably yelling that the whole thing is wrong. 19. The Colosseum could hold around 50,000 people, which sounds impressive until you ask the obvious practical question. Where exactly did all those people go to the bathroom? The answer is, not ideally. There were latrines, yes, but nowhere near enough for a crowd that size spending hours packed into a giant stone arena. Spectators were reluctant to leave their places because someone else could steal the seat, especially in the more crowded sections. So people improvised in ways that would make any modern stadium manager simply resign. Some used containers. Others relieved themselves in stairways, corridors, or wherever they could get away with it. Conditions got worse the higher you went, where poorer spectators sat in the least comfortable sections. By the afternoon, the upper levels could be filthy beyond belief. Wealthier Romans had better seating and attendance. Everyone else got a front-row experience in what public entertainment smelled like in the ancient world. 20. Early gladiator categories were sometimes named after Rome's enemies, which made perfect sense in a culture that loved turning conquest into theater. You had types called Samnite, Gaul, and Thracian, and the audience could enjoy a nice little symbolic reminder that Rome conquered these people and now watched stylized versions of them lose in public. But politics changes, and so do labels. The Samnites eventually became allies, and then citizens, which made it awkward to keep using their name as shorthand for a defeated enemy in bloodsport. Suddenly, the branding did not look so good. So that category faded away, replaced by names based more on weapons and fighting style than on ethnic identity. The Thracian label lasted longer because Thrace stayed more conveniently foreign. Rome was not being sensitive in a modern sense. It was being practical. Public humiliation works better when it does not insult people you now need on your side. 21. The rudis was a simple wooden sword, but for a gladiator it meant more than gold, applause, or one more lucky victory. It was the symbol of freedom. When a fighter earned the rudis, he was officially released from his gladiatorial obligations and could leave the arena behind as a free man. No more forced combat, no more being displayed for the crowd, no more bleeding on command. Some retired gladiators became trainers, using their experience to shape new fighters. Others disappeared into ordinary life, which must have been both wonderful and deeply strange after years in the arena machine. A few men famously refused the rudis and kept fighting, which says a lot about how addictive fame and identity can become. But for most, that little wooden sword represented the only victory that truly mattered. It meant you survived Rome's favorite nightmare long enough to walk away from it. 22. Julius Caesar staged grand gladiator games in honor of his father in 65 before Christ. The only tiny problem with that emotional tribute was that his father had died 20 years earlier. That is not memorial devotion. That is political marketing wearing funeral clothes. Romans did hold funeral games, yes, but a 2-decade delay makes the real motive pretty obvious. Caesar needed visibility, popularity, and public excitement, and nothing delivered those things quite like expensive spectacle. So he borrowed a staggering amount of money and put on a lavish show featuring hundreds of gladiators, some reportedly outfitted in silver armor because subtlety was not on the menu. The people loved it. Naturally. Free entertainment has a way of making voters deeply sentimental about somebody's conveniently useful, dead relative. Caesar was not just honoring family. He was investing in power. Roman politics did not merely overlap with spectacle. It practically married it. 23. Men who fought wild animals in the arena, often called venatores or bestiarii, usually ranked below regular gladiators in the strange social ladder of Roman violence. Which is impressive, because gladiators themselves were already scraping the bottom of respectable society. Yet even inside this brutal profession, Rome still managed to create status divisions. Fighting beasts was often considered less prestigious, less skilled, and somehow less honorable than fighting another armed human. Animal fighters trained separately, lived separately, earned less, and in some cases were even buried separately. The death industry had career tiers. If you battled lions for public entertainment, there was still somebody higher up the arena food chain looking down on you. That tells you everything about Roman society. It could not simply exploit people. It had to sort, rank, and categorize them while doing it. Even professional violence came with office politics and class distinctions. 24. Despite everything modern movies suggest, most gladiator matches did not end with one fighter dying in the sand. That would have been terrible business. Training a gladiator required time, money, food, medical care, and constant supervision. Killing one every time he fought would have destroyed the industry at a speed even Romans would find financially embarrassing. Most bouts ended with surrender, often signaled by the defeated fighter raising a finger and appealing for mercy. Then, the crowd and the sponsor of the games weighed in on whether he should live. Usually, survival made more sense. Audiences had favorite fighters, Lanisti wanted their investment back, and recurring stars were good for business. Executions certainly happened, especially with criminals or special spectacles, but professional gladiator combat was usually meant to entertain. not to burn through talent immediately. Rome liked blood, but Rome also understood that profitable blood should be renewable. 25. Flama was a Syrian gladiator and one of the strangest stars of the arena because he was offered freedom 4 separate times and rejected it every single time. 4. Most men would have grabbed the wooden sword and sprinted toward civilian life before anyone changed their mind. Flama kept coming back. His tombstone records an impressive career, with dozens of victories and multiple freedom offers declined, as if even the stone itself could not quite believe the choice. Why do that? Nobody knows for sure. Outside the arena, he would have been a foreign ex-slave with limited standing and uncertain prospects. Inside it, he was famous, admired, and somebody. The arena gave him identity, status, and purpose in a world that may not have offered him much beyond that. Freedom sounds glorious until it comes with emptiness. Sometimes the prison becomes familiar enough to feel safer than open space. 26. The Colosseum was funded in a way that feels almost too perfectly Roman to be real. Emperor Vespasian used treasure seized after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 of the Common Era, including wealth taken from the temple, to help finance the empire's most famous arena. So yes, one of history's great symbols of Roman entertainment was partly built with war loot from a shattered holy site. But Rome was not done being shameless. Vespasian also taxed public urine because tanners and cloth workers used it in processing, and the emperor saw revenue where other people saw a smell-based crime scene. When his son objected, Vespasian reportedly held up a coin and said, "Money does not stink." The phrase survived. Naturally. So the Colosseum's financial backstory includes sacred plunder and P-taxes. If you wanted a single origin story that captured Rome's genius, greed, and complete lack of embarrassment, that would be difficult to beat. 27. Roman summers were vicious, and stuffing tens of thousands of people into the Colosseum without shade would have turned the audience into one giant slow-cooking complaint. So the arena used the velarium, a massive retractable canopy stretched over much of the seating area. This was not some cute little awning. It was a huge engineering operation involving ropes, poles, fabric, timing, and enough coordination to make modern event crews nod respectfully. In fact, the job was so complicated that experienced sailors were brought in to handle it, because managing enormous sheets of material in the wind was basically a naval skill transplanted onto a stadium roof. Men from the Imperial fleet helped operate it, which means trained sailors were assigned to keep spectators comfortable while those spectators watched organized death below. It is one of those details that sounds invented. But no, Rome really did use military-grade manpower to prevent sunburn during blood sport. 28. The Ludus Magnus was the main gladiator school in Rome, positioned close to the Colosseum for a very practical reason: efficiency. The two were linked by a private underground passage so fighters could move from their barracks to the arena without crossing public streets. That tunnel solved several Roman problems at once. First, security. Gladiators were valuable property, and owners generally prefer their expensive human weapons not to wander off. Second, logistics. Marching armed fighters through crowds is not exactly smooth event management. Third, drama. It looked far more impressive when men appeared from beneath the arena than if they had simply shuffled in through the front like late arrivals at a bad theater performance. Parts of this connection still survive today. So yes, Rome effectively gave gladiators a private underground route to work. It was part commute, part containment strategy, and part stagecraft all wrapped into one. 29. Left-handed gladiators were prized because they turned ordinary training into a problem. Almost every fighter practiced against right-handed opponents, which meant footwork, guard position, attack timing, and defensive habits were all built around that familiar pattern. Then along comes a left-hander, and suddenly the whole geometry of the fight shifts. Angles feel wrong, your instincts betray you, and the target you expect to be there is not where your body thinks it should be. In a sport where hesitation could get you killed, that confusion mattered a lot. Trainers knew it too. Left-handed fighters, called schiva, could be more valuable precisely because they were unusual. Some schools even tried retraining men to fight left-handed in order to create that advantage artificially, though success was limited. Nature had handed a few fighters a built-in tactical edge, and Rome, being Rome, turned that quirk into market value. 30. Not every danger in the Colosseum stayed neatly inside the performance area. Some spectacles involved archers, staged hunts, or demonstrations where arrows were fired from the arena floor at animals. That sounds exciting right up until you remember that the upper seating sections, where poorer spectators sat, were not impossibly far away. A missed shot or badly judged angle could send a projectile into the crowd. And sometimes that happened. The wealthier viewers in safer lower areas had barriers and better placement. The people in the cheap seats got a much less reassuring arrangement, plus the unspoken understanding that if something went wrong, nobody important was going to compensate them. Attending the games meant accepting a level of risk, especially if you could not afford a better seat. Rome even built class division into the direction danger traveled. If an arrow went astray, odds were it was headed towards someone poor. 31. Successful gladiators were celebrity brands long before modern athletes discovered shoes, energy drinks, and sponsored social media posts. Popular fighters had their images stamped onto lamps, cups, pottery, glass, and all kinds of household items because Romans were perfectly willing to buy merchandise tied to a famous man who hit people for a living. Some fans even seemed to believe owning objects linked to a star gladiator might transfer some of his luck, strength, or general aura of intimidating competence. Sound familiar? It should. Human beings have been buying identity through famous faces for a very long time. Gladiators also showed up in graffiti, wall inscriptions, and crude public praise that worked like ancient hype campaigns. One famous line from Pompeii gushes that a certain fighter made women swoon, which is basically old Roman marketing translated into modern language. This guy is hot, powerful, admired, and yes, you should absolutely buy the product with his face on it. 32. Emperor Trajan celebrated victory in the Dacian Wars with what may have been the most excessive gladiatorial program Rome ever produced. Games lasting 123 straight days. That is 4 months of nearly continuous spectacle, packed with killing on a scale that sounds less like entertainment and more like a logistical fever dream. Ancient sources speak of around 10,000 gladiators involved and about 11,000 wild animals slaughtered. Even allowing for a bit of imperial exaggeration, the sheer scale is still monstrous. Think about what that required: transport, food, housing, scheduling, medical care, cages, handlers, trainers, stage management, and endless money pouring into a machine designed to keep shocking an audience that had already seen everything. Trajan was not just celebrating victory. He was proving imperial power through absurd excess. Rome had become so numb to violence that only gigantic numbers could still impress it. That is not grandeur. That is normalized insanity. So now answer this properly. If you could erase one Roman emperor for making the arena even more insane, who goes first and why? And what gladiator fact did we not mention that absolutely deserves a spot on this list? Drop it in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more history at its weirdest, dumbest, and most unhinged.